Hey there, creatives. Thank you so much for your continued listenership. I'm really excited to share this conversation. I gave a little teaser a few weeks ago when Dr. Rachel Brandoff was on the show, and we had an individual interview, and we were talking about networking and how to work through that, even if you find yourself feeling more of an introvert. Um, and we had shared, or I had shared, that I would be having her back on the show, along with her co-author, Dr. Astra Czerny. And so they're my guests today, and we're talking about their new book, The Empowerment Wheel, which will be coming out in March of 2024, but it's currently available for pre-order. I had the privilege of reading the book in advance, and it's wonderfully done. There's so much research that is grounded throughout the text, and I think it offers a not only a creative way of helping people who have found themselves in relationships where there's violence, um, but it's also very, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not judgmental. It's open. It's has built-in flexibility, so that people are able to move through their process um, at a way that is safe and comfortable for them, which is so important, right? When we're working with individuals who have experienced trauma. Anyway, I hope you enjoy this conversation with Dr. Brandoff and Dr. Czerny.
The Creative Psychotherapist is the official podcast of the Creative Clinicians Corner, a practice-building resource for creative psychotherapists. TCP Podcast is the cast for creative, expressive, and experiential-focused psychotherapists curious to learn how to design, build, and scale a thriving private practice. Your host, Raina Lombardi, interviews successful therapists about the tools and strategies they have used to develop creative-focused practices. They also talk about the products, services, and side hustles they have developed using their knowledge and creativity to enhance their therapy practices, make a greater impact in their communities, and diversify their income streams. Welcome. Now here's your host, Raina Lombardi.
Thanks so much for listening to the Creative Psychotherapist podcast. I'm your host, Raina Lombardi, and I'm really, really excited to speak with my guests today and share a conversation with you all. Today, I'm speaking with Dr. Astra B. Czerny, and she is a licensed counselor and a national certified counselor and a board certified telemental health provider. And she maintains a small private practice for clients and a supervision and consultation practice with clinicians. Dr. Czerny is an associate professor at Lenore,
Fine. Yep.
University in Hickory, North Carolina, where she is the clinical coordinator and the developer of the Trauma Certificate Program. Dr. Czerny is an active presenter at both state and national conferences. Her areas of interest include healing from trauma and empowerment. And we also have Dr. Rachel Brandoff, who is a registered board certified art therapist and a credentialed supervisor. She's an associate professor and coordinator at the art therapy concentration in the community and trauma counseling program at Thomas Jefferson University. Dr. Brandoff maintains a clinical practice specializing in individuals who are coming out of crises and coping with trauma. She provides supervision and consultation to art therapists and professional counselors. She served on the boards of various professional organizations and is a regular presenter at regional and national conferences. Their new book, The Empowerment Wheel, Helping Clients Heal from Relationship Abuse, comes out in early 2024 and is currently available for pre-order. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank
Thank
you
you
for
for
having
having
us.
us.
So, how did the two of you meet and kind of join forces to create this book? You're clearly working in different parts of the country and different programs. How did this come to be, your professional relationship?
Yeah, you want me to answer that? Yeah, so I'm in North Carolina now, but I haven't always been here. I was working in Philadelphia at what was Philadelphia University, and then merged with Thomas Jefferson when Rachel came on board as a faculty member there to direct the art therapy program at that university. And that was great because she and I started talking about I don't know, just our backgrounds and what we're interested in. And somehow this article that I had written came up about the Empowerment Wheel. And I shared that with her, and Rachel said, at least this is how I remember it, Rachel, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Rachel said, oh, this would be great to use in my classes. In fact, I think I'm going to go ahead and use it with some of my students. And I thought, wow, that's really, really cool. And she did that. And that just launched the whole conversation about using this model and infusing it with art therapy practices.
Awesome.
Yeah, as soon as I read the article that Astra had written, and she's really downplaying it. It's not just an article. She had developed this whole model for use with people who are coming out of relationship abuse, based on her extensive work working in domestic violence shelters with women. And she had seen a lot of this in her work. And for those listeners who are familiar with this population, there are not a lot of clinical approaches that are designed to help this population.
Right.
Of course, the prevailing thought is that coming out of this type of traumatic situation, people need therapy, but then what does that therapy look like? And we do address that in our book. And Astra had written this article and developed this model based on her own work that is really brilliant. And I immediately saw use for the application of art therapy into this. I did start using it both in my classes with students, but also in my practice with clients. And there was this combined thing that I remember. One was that I was really attracted to this model that she had developed and thinking of this as a useful clinical tool. And we certainly need useful clinical tools. And then there was also the added bonus that Astra and I really had a nice synergy in personality and sense of humor and interest in collaborating together. We started speaking at a number of regional conferences. Right. And as you well know, Raina, when you find somebody that you work well with and you enjoy that collaborative process, you don't really want to let go of that. And I certainly didn't want to, even when Astra went on to move to a different university.
Oh, wonderful. So I really want to know more about the Empowerment Wheel and model. Would you be willing to share, Astra, what that is, so that listeners who may not be familiar and don't have the benefit of reading your book in advance the way I did, can understand what that model is?
Yeah. I'd be happy to do that. And before I do that, I just want to give credit to Pam Lassiter, who co-authored the original article with me, who actually became my dissertation chair when I was doing my PhD work at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. So I think it's only fair to give her a little shout out because she really encouraged me also to publish the model and get that out there, and then that made Rachel and I being able to collaborate possible. So just a little shout out there. Yeah, so the empowerment wheel is a model that comprises 6 sectors that really are the answer to, for me, especially when I was working in domestic violence at a local shelter, the answer to the question that so many of my clients ask me over and over and over again, how do I not end up in a relationship like this again? How do I not end up in this same situation? It seems like a lot of them had, came to me and said, like, there's something wrong with me. My picker is broken. I choose the same type of person over and over. I always end up in this type of a situation, and I don't want to do that again. I'm tired of this. And so it took a couple of years, but over time I began to think, like, my gosh, everybody's asking me this same question. And my response to that isn't necessarily, I don't have like a really neat response to that, but it seems like when I talk with these women, there are a core number of things that we talk about that are essential to their healing journey. And as I was thinking about that, I started to write those things down, and actually that became the foundation of the wheel model. And so the 6 sectors are paying attention to red flags that occur within an interpersonal relationship. And I know that sounds kind of simple, but actually it can be incredibly complex and difficult and challenging for a lot of us who have been in abusive relationships to pay attention to those red flags consciously and intentionally.
It's homeostasis.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so the second sector is boundaries. And again, there's so much talk about boundaries, but in some ways the talk about boundaries isn't always very helpful, because a lot of it just basically is like, you just need stronger boundaries, right? But we don't necessarily talk about the flexibility that is needed in recognizing when somebody is safe, and in recognizing when maybe somebody is not so safe for us in our world, and having that ability to kind of flex between permeable and impermeable, or open and closed boundaries in response to environmental cues. So red flags and boundaries play together in that, right? Your ability to recognize red flags and your ability to kind of negotiate boundaries. The next sector is, I'm going to draw a blank. The next sector is relationship authenticity. And relationship authenticity has to do with how authentically yourself you can stay, whether you're in or out of a relationship. So your ability to kind of be authentically yourself, which even that outside of interpersonal relationships can be a bit of a challenge for a lot of us, depending on how we grew up and what our childhood years were like. And then our ability to stay authentically ourselves in intimate partnership within the context of relationship. And that can be a complex issue as well. And I want to just acknowledge that a lot of victims of relationship abuse don't necessarily make a conscious decision to give up parts of themselves to stay in a relationship. That happens through grooming behaviors. It happens through the escalation of abuse, which often begins as very subtle and non-intrusive in a way, almost flattering in the beginning for some of us, right? And kind of escalates over time. But before you know it, a lot of clients find or stay, I found that after a while, I didn't even know who I was anymore. I had given up so much of myself to stay in the relationship or to stay safe in the relationship. Again, depending on the level of violence that or abuse that exists. So this idea of kind of reclaiming that authenticity as a part of the healing journey, and being willing to stay authentically yourself as a survivor of abuse, moving into new relationships, becomes a very important part of the healing journey. The next sector is locus of control. Rachel, hop in here anytime if you. I don't mean to hijack the conversation. So the next sector is locus of control. And locus of control has a lot to do with self-worth and tends to be either internal or external. In that, we either have kind of a fixed internal sense of our sense of our self-worth that isn't necessarily impacted by how others treat us, or we tend to have a little bit more of an external sense of who we are that is easily or more easily impacted by how others treat us. Yeah, Rachel.
You want to get to the last two, and then, because I could see you wanting to talk more about
Yes. Okay. And then the last two are self-talk, the way that we speak to ourselves. Often that is reflective of the abuser's voice, or childhood negative voices that kind of become auto tapes that play in our head. So addressing that. And then finally, integrated self. And we are very aware that ultimately individuals who are in abusive relationships often have histories of childhood trauma as well. And so that your willingness to enter into counseling and therapy to do that kind of integrative core childhood trauma work that really represents healing the whole person. And so that is something that I think we are very aware of and we want to advocate for as well. So those are the 6 sectors.
Wonderful. And Rachel, did you want to add something? Because I know you said the last 2, and then there was something else in specific that perhaps you identified that I didn't catch on to.
Well, I think, all of the sectors can be elaborated on. I was just urging Astra to get through sort of defining what those are. These sectors are really themes that come up over and over again.
Yeah.
And I think that we certainly know as clinicians that while every person's journey and story is unique, and their experience is their own, and their path to healing is their own, there are a lot of commonalities. And that's really what led to the creation of these 6 sectors. Many people, for example, struggle with this idea with the reality of their locus of control. One of the things that drew me to this theory, this model, right from the beginning, was the way Astra did such a intentional job of framing the idea that there is no universal right way towards healing. Within any of these areas, there is not one sort of identified pathological state and one right way of being. For example, if we talk about locus of control, it's not better or worse to have an internal locus of control or an external locus of control. We have no intention of suggesting that there's one better way to be or right way to be, or even that a person is all one or all the other.
Right.
The benefit of having these sectors clearly defined is that they allow for areas of exploration within therapy. And while having an internal versus an external locus of control, either way could be beneficial for a person or potentially problematic. The thing that is most beneficial is raising one's awareness about how one operates in the world and carries themselves, and really having the opportunity to examine, this is me, this is how I'm presenting. Is this how I want to be presenting? Is this serving me well? Is this what feels right for me? And to better sort of know and own oneself. And I think that we see that in every sector. Certainly, locus of control is not the only one, but really this model is about identifying those core themes that come up over and over and over again so many times with people who are victims or survivors of relationship abuse in all of its forms.
Yeah, I like that. I think that there's a lot of applications, no matter who you're working with, that there's no right way to be. It's understanding how this presentation, how this interaction or behavior, how this thought process is either helping me or hindering me in the given moment. Because, most people, I feel like, develop or habituate certain patterns as a way of protecting themselves and keeping them safe, but then that becomes the norm, and then it starts to impact other relationships. So it's like helping people to understand, okay, when is it a healthy response to engage in this, and when is it a healthy response to engage in this way, is what I hear you saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And the other thing that I would add to that is that our culture, like our cultural heritage, really influences a lot of these sectors as well. Boundaries are absolutely defined for each of us individually by our cultural background, as well as locus of control and relationship authenticity. All of these constructs, the sectors of the wheel, are influenced by our cultural heritage, and so they look different for different people, and we're very aware of that. And so there isn't, as Rachel said, a standard goal for any one of these sectors, but rather an invitation to explore perhaps one's own journey and maybe increase one's self-awareness of how these different constructs or sectors show up in one's life and how they play out in the context of interpersonal relationship.
Beautiful. So what are some of the ways you've integrated art therapy interventions with this, so that you're providing people with an embodied experience of the sector, which I think is different than just providing education and talking about it, right? Like when we have that felt sense of doing it, there's an understanding that happens in a deeper way. How have you approached that?
So each of the 6 sectors includes, as it's written in our forthcoming book, includes an art therapy inspired activity that is designed for the therapist to facilitate in session with their client. And this can be completed by art therapists and certainly by other trained clinicians as well. And each art therapy inspired intervention is designed to help get at the core of what that sector is intending to explore. So as we were saying before, there's no one identified goal in any sector. The ultimate goal is that this model provides a structure and a framework for bringing up and investigating all of these different themes in therapy. There's no one place to start in the wheel, and different clients might come back and re-examine different parts of the wheel over and over again as needed. For some people, relationship authenticity might be sort of the crux of their issues. For other people, they might have to come back to red flags over and over again. There are so many factors in play, of course, including where somebody is in their healing journey, where they are in their relationship. But there is a proposed art therapy inspired intervention that accompanies each sector in the chapter. Within that, each intervention comes with a little bit of background. Certainly art therapists who are experienced in integrating art making and art materials into the clinical practice will be familiar with many of the references and the materials and even some of the projects. But this text is written in a way that a confident clinician who does not have an art background will be able to understand ways of talking about the art and bringing art making up in practice. Because one of the things that we know, and we certainly know this about trauma, is that using other parts of the brain besides talking can be immensely valuable. And sometimes our clients are ready to take healthy risks in expressing themselves in other ways. So we give clinicians sort of the tools of the background, of the inspiration, of the project, information about all the materials that you need, preparation that may be needed, ways of introducing the topic with your client, questions that can help process the art making experience and reflect on the art product to help sort of deepen the experience of what's made. It is certainly very important for clinicians who are not art therapists to respect professional boundaries, and engaging in therapeutic art making in session does not necessarily make one an art therapist. However, art therapy interventions can be really valuable in the context of treatment, and art therapists don't own all the crayons in the room. So I encourage clinicians who aren't art therapists to do a little bit more investigation into their own creative process, to consider engaging in some professional development that includes art therapy in your sphere if you plan to integrate this into your practice. But it is really designed to help clinicians who have never used art think about, how could I bring this in a way that's structured, complete, understands that the use of art making and art materials can deepen the process of therapy significantly, and that there needs to be some reverence and preparedness to deal with that as things come up.
Yeah, beautifully said. And thank you for sharing that the interventions can be accessible by all, that it's not solely for art therapists, because I would imagine that there's a diverse array of individuals, could be facilitators, could be therapists, in domestic violence settings where this would be applied. I know here at the shelter that we have here, they rely heavily on interns. There's a lot of volunteer staff and not necessarily a lot of highly clinical folks. I think you addressed this very well in the beginning parts of your book. Can we kind of pivot a little bit and shift to talking about some of the challenges that you write about in terms of the systemic issues when it comes to really providing care for folks to successfully move out of these relationships and to find stability? What would you say are some of the biggest challenges in your experience, Astra, and
Yeah.
working in those settings?
Yeah. I mean, the standard, well, I shouldn't say that, but a very common way that a lot of victims use to extricate themselves out of these relationships is to go into hiding, right? Is to somehow go underground, quote unquote. And that might include moving into a shelter, a domestic violence shelter. But it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. You can go underground in other ways as well. But the idea that a victim of relationship abuse is expected in our society to go underground and essentially, which often includes moving in some way. If she has children, if it's a woman, and I'm just going to be very frank that it is frequently women. So I use that gender because of that. If there are children involved, that can mean moving those children from their school into another school district, or having to rearrange or renegotiate transportation, childcare needs. The whole array of one's life is basically upturned and has to be renegotiated. Whether you're in a domestic violence shelter or not, you have to navigate then also the legal system around getting a domestic violence order, protection order, excuse me, if that's something that you feel that the client feels is helpful for them, as well as just the legal system in general, and everything that entails. So I think for a lot of victims in that situation, it's really, really overwhelming. Their whole lives are basically turned upside down, and the idea that they have to figure out how to keep themselves safe in a society that does not hold the perpetrator accountable in any way. Domestic violence is in most states still a misdemeanor, depending on the level of abuse. So for a lot of what happens within the context of an intimate partnership, it is often just a misdemeanor, which means that if somebody is arrested, they may not even end up in jail, right? Or if they do, it's a 24-hour hold and then they're released. And so the idea of a victim having to ensure her own safety is so incredibly burdensome in a society that really doesn't, I'll just be very frank, care very much about the safety of victims, doesn't prioritize that. What I think we do prioritize is the privilege of men over that. So there's a whole host of difficulties and challenges and life-changing upheaval that victims have to negotiate, that make extricating oneself out of these relationships really, really difficult and challenging, which is frankly why a lot of women often opt to stay.
I would just piggyback on that by saying that, I mean, Astra mentioned the shelter system, the legal system, but sort of on a broader societal system. I mean, the entire #MeToo movement within the rape culture that we live in was born out of the reality, in part, the reality that victims are not believed most of the time. So making change in a system that doesn't believe you, whether that is the police, the legal system, the school, your own family, people are not believed. And that is a larger systemic issue that makes And then that makes this sort of stacks the deck against a victim, if you will. And then if you are believed, if a victim is believed about their situation, the onus is on them to make change and to make it quickly, because resources that are available are time limited.
Right.
And it's like, okay, you're believed, now get up quickly and turn your life around. And anybody that's ever been in a relationship, good, bad, or ugly, knows that it's much more complicated than that. And deciding that you're ready to make change, making that change can take a long time, especially if you want to be financially stable, if you have other people to support, if your physical safety is at risk, if there are so many extenuating circumstances. So while certainly there are these systemic infrastructure pieces that are problematic, so is the larger culture.
Yeah. And let me just add to that too, that I think sometimes the domestic violence movement in and of itself can be a hindrance as well, in that the expectation is often that a victim leave immediately the abusive partner, when that is not always the best choice for that individual either. And so there fails to be like a nuanced conversation about what, and also a conversation that includes cultural awareness, and an understanding of how different cultures might approach these types of situations, when the only answer is you have to leave and you have to leave immediately. That can be a deterrent for a lot of victims as well. And so the domestic violence movement in and of itself can sometimes be disempowering to women or to individuals who are seeking support in navigating what their choices are around the relationships that they're struggling with.
Yeah, it certainly seems to me that in many areas, it's shame-inducing to have to leave and to go into hiding and live a secret life is incredibly shame-inducing.
Absolutely.
Which is so disempowering. It's the opposite of what that individual needs, yet they're kind of wearing that cloak, operating in darkness, but also the emphasis that they're personally responsible for fixing this whole scenario. Right, that the perpetrator of the violence, they can stay put, they can continue to go on as they go on, and
they go back to their home, they go back to their job, they aren't restricted in any way. Yeah,
it's that part is so confounding,
mind-boggling.
It really speaks to systemic values. And if we want to be a society that values victims' rights, then we need to do better. We need to turn the script around.
Yeah. Do you have any suggestions for us as, clinicians in the work that we do? What are even some small things that we can do, but as a collective would really be impactful to making some of these shifts, in order for individuals to have more nuanced care and care that isn't so shame-inducing, and it doesn't have them carrying the burden of all of the reparations?
Two things I can think of are, one, to get involved on a political level and advocate for legislation that supports victims' rights. There has been legislation out there that has been proposed, in some cases passed successfully. It's certainly not universal. It's almost never priority. And more voices, particularly voices of clinicians in the community who are seeing lots of this, could be helpful.
Mhm.
Another thing that I think is really important that I want to mention is that clinicians, we also have our own biases. I have certainly at times been guilty of judgment towards other people and their relationships, thinking, why do they stay with that person? Why are they with them? Why are they not getting out of what seems like a toxic relationship? I like to think that I've done a good amount of work around understanding my biases. I like to think that I also re-examine that every time I'm working with a client who's in a relationship that I am questioning. Certainly, it's the client's choice. And sometimes I think we get very protective of our clients. We see them making what we think is a bad decision, and we want to weigh in and say, come on, save yourself. What are you doing here? This isn't the right thing for you. How can you not see this? It's so clear to me. And there are certainly times when it might be appropriate to challenge your client or hold that up to them, or even share your personal viewpoint. And also, it's important to check your biases. If you are of the opinion that somebody who's in an abusive relationship should just get out, what are they waiting for? Why are they staying there? They should leave. That's a bias. Of course, there's nothing wrong with having biases when we know where they come from, understand them, and understand how they might be damaging to the people we're working with. People have a lot of reasons for staying, and a lot of good reasons for staying. And leaving, as Astra mentioned, is not always the right thing. In fact, for many victims, leaving results in death.
Mhm.
So staying can be really important. And there's a lot of limitations put on victims whereby they are so dependent on their abusers that leaving would be devastating to their life. So I think that understanding your own biases and understanding if you're having a strong reaction to somebody else's relationship, whether they're your client or somebody else you know in the world, why do they tolerate that? I remember that coming up in discussion a lot when the Rihanna-Chris Brown relationship was prominent in the media. Here she is, a strong, wealthy, competent, talented young woman. Why is she tolerating this? And a lot of judgment about what was right for her in her relationship and what she should do. And if she's not going to do this, then what does she deserve as a result of it? And it's more complicated than that. There's a lot of people out there that won't examine their biases, but counselors, therapists, clinicians have a responsibility to do so.
Yeah. We teach there's like your licensing in Florida, every time your renewal cycle comes up, there's certain trainings you have to do. One of them that comes up periodically is an interpersonal violence training, and we offer that through my practice, and that is one of the exercises that we engage people in, is to creatively explore what your biases are, whether it's for why are they not leaving, or the bias that many hold towards the abuser, who likely is coming from their own family system of trauma and their own, intergenerational experiences. So that part I feel like is really important, the examining of our biases, because it's going to impact the work if not.
Yeah. And our clients end up being the beneficiaries of our bias, right? Whether it's articulated verbally or clearly or more of a felt sense, they feel the impact of our bias. And if you've ever felt somebody's judgment without them saying a word, then you know exactly what I mean.
Mhm.
Yeah, for sure. What are you hoping that readers will take away from your new book?
That's a great question. I really hope that they'll hear that word empowerment and that they will walk away from the book. Um, and we're also very aware that, you know, we wrote our book for clinicians, but we're also very aware that um, our book may fall into the hands of survivors as well.
Mhm.
So we kind of wrote um, in a way to both of those audiences. Yeah, and so my hope is that they would really focus on that word empowerment, and that they would understand that there isn't necessarily an end game or a perfect answer to all of the sectors or the information that's in the book, but rather um, an opportunity to explore and decide for themselves what is best, and
Mhm.
what their own future holds for them in a way that is actually very empowering for them. I mean, I think ultimately that's what I would hope, is that they walk away from it feeling somewhat empowered.
Mhm. Beautiful.
Yeah, I hope that people who read this book find some exercise or activity or intervention that is a way in to this discussion for them. In addition to we have 6 chapters, one dedicated to each sector that has art therapy inspired interventions within. And in addition to that, there are also a series of other thought exercises, discussion points, questions to self.
Mm.
And we did this because our experience working clinically has led us to understand that there are certain avenues of inquiry that sort of allow for a way into this. And this is a hard topic to talk about for many
Oh, yeah.
people. Um, and we're finding that relationship abuse is so much more common
Yeah.
than we ever thought. And I think for people, particularly for people who never wanted to see themselves as somebody in an abusive relationship,
Mhm.
or who might be coming to the realization that my relationship is toxic or there's something not okay here, that there are gentle but powerful ways into considering how this might be impacting them. And I'm hoping that somebody who reads this book can seize on a nugget that will allow for the beginning of exploration in themselves if they haven't already taken that step.
Yeah, absolutely.
Beautiful. I think in addition to that, you all did a really nice job really providing the history of like when we started to do something about this and how little it's evolved over the years. Like there hasn't been a lot of change,
Mhm.
and I think, the conversation about the systemic stuff really reflects that. And of course, the way we treat it, we don't want to see it. If we don't see it, then we can, pretend that it's not happening. And we don't have to really do something about it, when really it is incredibly prevalent
Yep.
and so destructive, and not just destructive now, but that ripple effect of what happens for the folks that grow up in a household where that is commonplace, to then go out and repeat that, or find themselves in relationships where that is happening, and it's so destructive.
Yeah.
And that was sort of the beauty, I think, of the Me Too movement, is that while many people might say, oh, I'm so sick of seeing that hashtag Me Too everywhere and everybody's just jumping on the bandwagon, it was also a banner of how prevalent this is and how common it is and how much people are tired of living in a way where this very common and very affecting problem is relegated to the shadows and sort of tucked under in the, if we don't see it, we can pretend it's not there. Sexual abuse is rampant. Child sexual abuse is epidemic. Trafficking is all over the place. And these are all permutations of relationship abuse. And while you're right, there are so many systemic problems and so little has happened, so little progress has moved the needle, I am a little bit hopeful that movements like Me Too can begin to push voices of survivors to the forefront, can begin to sort of amplify and validate enough that there can be larger systemic change eventually. If not today, then soon.
Well, we have to start somewhere, right? Like one step at a time. And I think, books like yours and using your voices to speak out and educate people is, one step forward in making that change happen. Because even within our field, I think people are immune in some way to really acknowledging the real truth of the statistics of how frequent it occurs. And particularly, you brought up human trafficking, which is such a huge part. Usually we think, okay, domestic violence, it's, some kind of spousal relationship or thing, but that's like one of the main hooks for the young girls or young people, right? I'm going to make you fall in love with me, and then I'm going to push you out into this horrible world. I'm here in Florida, Texas, and California are one of the biggest states for this particular issue. But I've actually heard other clinicians in Florida say, why are we talking about this? This is, and I thought to myself, what? Like they really thought that this wasn't an issue. But I, at the time, had been working with girls that had come out of trafficking situations, and was very familiar at how frequent it is and how bad it is. So I think the more that we can talk about it and raise that awareness, that visibility to say, no, this is here, we have to do something about it. It's really important.
Yeah, it's our responsibility to do something. It's right here in our community. This is not something that's happening somewhere else to somebody else, and it's not your problem. It is your problem.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you both coming and talking about your work with me. And for listeners, where can people find your book? I know it's available for pre-order. Where can they find it?
It's available for pre-order on Amazon.
Yeah, it comes out in March of 2020, and then will be available on
2024.
I'm sorry, there. Thank you, 2024, not in the past.
Okay.
And will be available on the Jessica Kingsley Publisher website, as well as a variety of other booksellers, including Barnes and Noble. And we will be, we have a number of conferences in the next few months lined up where we will be presenting on the model, introducing it to clinicians, helping them to understand that this is a viable tool for working with clients who have history of relationship abuse. And we're also available if anybody wants to bring us to your university or bookstore or neighborhood or organization to come talk about the model there. In some cases, we just do a lecture. In some cases, we bring in art activities and host a little bit more of an intimate kind of support group style introduction to the art making that accompanies the model.
That sounds fabulous. Do you have a list of the upcoming conferences that you're going to be presenting on that I might be able to put in the show notes in case folks that are listening want to learn more and want to attend one of those trainings?
Yep.
Sure, absolutely. And we can send you those to include in the show notes.
Absolutely.
Awesome. And where can people find you and reach out to you directly if they are interested in having you come out and facilitate an experience, whether that's a lecture or a workshop? How can they reach out to you?
Yeah, I'm happy to provide my email address for anybody who wants to reach out to me.
Yes, as am I. You can put it in the show notes, rachelbrandoff@gmail.com. We're delighted to talk more about this model. And, one of the things that makes Astra and I so excited about it is that while the model is new to the rest of the world, we've both been using it now for several years and have seen the benefit of it in working with clients and people who have actually been victims and survivors of relationship abuse. So it is tried and tested and highly useful.
Yep. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and I'll give my email address as well, astra.czerny@gmail.com. So,
and for those of you like me, it doesn't read the way it sounds. So Astra's name, ASTRA dot, and her last name
CZERNY. Yep.
@gmail.com.
Yep.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you both so much. I really appreciate you taking the time, and I appreciate getting to have a first glance at the book and found it to be really incredible in terms of all of the research that you really have supported the work with. It's a really wonderful text, and I hope that clinicians find it really, really useful in their work.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Raina.
Yep, this was fun.
I hope you enjoyed this episode with Dr. Brandoff and Dr. Czerny and our discussion about their new book, The Empowerment Wheel, Helping Clients Heal from Relationship Abuse, which will come out in 2024, but is currently available for pre-order on Amazon. And it will be available on Jessica Kingsley's website. I highly recommend getting the book if you find yourself working specifically with this population, and even not, because the model, the empowerment model, is really applicable for so many different things, not just with relationship abuse. So check that out. And if you are looking to have experts come and teach on this model at your practice or center or educational institution, reach out to Dr. Brandoff and Dr. Czerny. That's something that they offer, and they'll come out and train you on how to use this model and approach with your client populations. All right, everyone, take good care, and we'll talk with you next week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Creative Psychotherapist. If you like what you heard, please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. For show notes, downloads, and additional resources, head over to the website at www.creativeclinicianscorner.com.